Hello everyone and welcome back to another 5 Recs video. So this is the second part of my 2 videos on the early Gothic. And I want to introduce you to 5 more books that are perhaps less well known, but give you some really interesting insights into other flavors of the early Gothic novel. So first up, I want to take us across the waves to America, to one of the first American novels and the first American Gothic novel. So this is Wheeland by Charles Brogden Brown. And it is a story of religious obsession leading to somebody essentially kind of losing their grip on reality. And it also ends with terrible crimes. So do brace yourself. It's not going to take you into the supernatural particularly. It's not going to be as fun a read. It's going to take you through thrills and through sorrows. So the second book that I want to recommend, and apologies in advance because this is a bit of a chonker, is Regina Marie Roche's The Children of the Abbey, and you can see how big it is there. Now, I want to recommend this because most people today wouldn't know who Regina Marie Roche is. But in her time, which was the time of Radcliffe, she was as famous as Radcliffe. This was a bestseller, which at points outsold Radcliffe. And it's a really interesting insight into what other women were writing at the time. Now, some of these elements are going to be fairly familiar. There is a heroine who is being persecuted, being defrauded of her inheritance. There's explained supernatural incidents. There's a love story that keeps going wrong. But it also will kind of unpack some of our assumptions about the early Gothic. So there's this idea, for example, that most of the early Gothic happens in Europe, and a lot of novels are set in Europe, but there's a lot as well set in the United Kingdom. And this is a great example of that because the novel takes us basically on a tour of the United Kingdom and Ireland, and we go to lots of different locations. So it's a really interesting read. Of course, it's a bit of a time suck, but it's worth it. The next one I want to introduce you to is St. Leon by William Godwin. Now, you might know William Godwin as a political philosopher, or you might know him as the father of Mary Shelley. And you also might be thinking, why isn't Sam recommending any Mary Shelley novels? Well, we all know Frankenstein, so I'm going to spend my time recommending things that are perhaps slightly less well known. But just as a side note, I do recommend diving into her other work, and my favorite is Valperga. But anyway, back to William Godwin. He wrote a number of Gothic or Gothic-esque novels, which often take on sort of questions of philosophy or of politics. Perhaps most famous is Caleb Williams, which is a man sort of persecuted by his employer because he discovers a crime. But this is one that I would recommend. So St. Leon basically finds the elixir of life or has it thrust upon him and then has to deal with the consequences. And we see him going through disaster after disaster after disaster immortally and going just from one thing to the other, trapped in this endless, horrifying Gothic cycle. I will warn you, this is in the first person. It's from his perspective, and he is a very annoying man. So do brace yourself for that. Next up, I wanted to introduce you to another woman writer, Charlotte Dacre, or Dacre. Now, she wrote a number of novels, but the most easily available is The Floyer or the Moor. Again, there's often a misconception that women were writing very staid, not very supernatural books in this period, that they were all sort of following the same formula. And Charlotte Dacre really does break that open and show us that women were writing a really diverse array of novels. And she's far from the only woman to be writing novels like this. But in this book, it's often kind of considered a female version or response to the monk. In this, we have Vittoria, and it's her who goes on this downward spiral, makes a deal with the devil, and ends up committing unspeakable crimes. The last one I want to recommend is my favorite Gothic novel, and it's the one that got me into the Gothic. It was recommended to me by a teacher when I was actually studying a module on the Russian Gothic Fantastic about 20 years ago, probably now. I read it and I was like, oh yes, this is it for me. I've fallen in love with this genre. And it's Charles Maturin's Melmouth the Wonderer. There's another demonic deal in here that's going on, but this is a series of inset stories, essentially. The central character, Melmouth the Wonderer, is a man who bargained his soul for extra years of life and knowledge. And he spends those years of life trying to get people to take his place. I'll let you work out, well, read whether he's successful or not. But we're going to encounter lots of different characters, learn their stories as he tries to push them to the point where they're driven to sell their souls to him. And spoiler alert here, he's never successful. Anyway, I hope that you enjoy some of these reads. As always, please feel free to share your own recommendations. The cutoff point is really about the 1830s for the early Gothic, so hold off on the Victorian recommendations. We'll get there in another video. And also do feel free to share your opinions of these books and your experiences of reading them, even if you disagree with my recommendation. So thank you for joining me today, and goodbye, everyone.